Welcome, sleepy souls, on Creepy Night's show. I am your storyteller. Tonight, here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you watching from and what time it is, and if there is a story you would like to hear next. I would love to know too. I've always been the kind of person who prefers living alone, but after I graduated college and moved to a new city for work, I realized very quickly that rent was going to eat me alive if I didn't find someone to split the cost with. So I did what most people do. I turned to Craigslist. It wasn't my first choice, but the apartment was perfect. Downtown, close to work, and surprisingly affordable for the size. The only condition was that I'd have to share the space with a guy who already lived there. His name was Ethan. The ad said he was in his late 20s, worked nights, and kept to himself. That sounded perfect to me. I didn't want a new best friend. I just wanted someone reliable to help with bills. When I first went to see the place, Ethan didn't really talk much. He had this tall, lanky frame, pale skin, and dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks. His handshake was limp, and his voice was quiet, almost hoarse when he said, "You're welcome to stay, just stay out of my room." I thought that was weird, but lots of people value privacy. I didn't push. The apartment itself was great, so I signed the lease. For the first couple of weeks, living with Ethan was actually pretty easy. We didn't cross paths much since he worked nights and I worked days. Sometimes when I came home late, I'd hear him moving around in his room. Soft footsteps, the creak of floorboards, but I never actually saw him leave or enter. That was the first strange thing. The second strange thing was his door. It was always locked. Always. Even when he wasn't home. I knew because sometimes I'd knock to let him know a package had arrived, but there would be no answer, no sounds inside, yet the door stayed locked tight. One Saturday morning, after a late night out, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed something in the mirror above the sink. The bathroom was right across the hall from Ethan's room, and when his door cracked open just slightly, I caught sight of, well, I don't know how to explain it. It was a mirror, a huge one, leaning against the far wall of his room. But it wasn't like any mirror I'd ever seen. It looked darker somehow, like the glass was tinted. And in that instant, I swear I saw movement. Something shift behind me in the reflection, even though I was standing perfectly still. The door shut quickly, and I nearly convinced myself it was just exhaustion messing with me. But after that, I couldn't stop noticing little things. Sometimes, when I walked past his door, I'd hear whispering. Low, urgent voices like a conversation, but never loud enough to make out the words. At night, I'd wake up to footsteps in the hallway, only to find nothing there. Once, I found muddy footprints leading from the front door straight to Ethan's room. But it had rained all day, and I never saw him leave. I kept telling myself it was none of my business. But then, things started happening in my room. One night, I woke up with the distinct feeling of being watched. My room was dark, but I swore I saw a shape in the corner. I flicked on the lamp, and it was gone. Another time, my closet door was wide open in the morning, though I always shut it before bed. Then came the dreams. I kept dreaming about the mirror. I'd see myself in it, standing in Ethan's room, only my reflection didn't move the way I did. Sometimes it smiled when I wasn't smiling. Other times it stepped closer while I stood still. One night, the reflection whispered my name. That's when I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. It was about 2 a.m. when I heard Ethan leave the apartment. That was rare, so I figured it was my only chance. His room was locked, of course, but I had an old library card that I'd used once or twice to jimmy stubborn doors. After a few tense minutes, the knob finally turned. The smell hit me first. Not rot exactly, but damp, musty, like wet earth. The room was almost empty. No bed, no dresser, nothing except that massive mirror against the wall. It was taller than me, framed in black wood with strange symbols carved into the edges. And in the glass, I saw Ethan. He was standing right behind me, even though the room was empty. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the mirror, Ethan's reflection was still staring at me. Only, it wasn't quite Ethan. His eyes were completely black, and his mouth twisted into this awful, wide grin. "Get out," the reflection whispered. I stumbled backward, slammed the door shut, and locked it again from the outside. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the card. The next morning, Ethan was at the kitchen table. He looked at me with those same dark circled eyes and said very calmly, "You went into my room." I froze. I hadn't left a trace. I was sure of it. But he knew. Somehow, he knew. That night, I pushed a chair under my doorknob before going to bed. I barely slept. Every sound in the apartment set my nerves on edge. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of something heavy being dragged down the hall. My heart raced as I listened. The sound stopped right outside my door. Then, slowly, the chair started to move. I watched in horror as the door creaked open inch by inch, even though the chair should have kept it shut. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. And then, through the narrow gap, I saw it. Not Ethan. Not exactly. It was his reflection. The same black eyes. The same twisted grin. And it whispered again, almost sweetly this time. "Your turn." When I first moved to Chicago for grad school, I didn't know anyone in the city. I was nervous, broke, and desperate to find a place that wouldn't swallow my entire stipend. The dorms were ridiculously overpriced, so I ended up scrolling through Facebook housing groups, half expecting to stumble into a scam. Instead, I found what looked like a miracle. A room in a 2-bedroom apartment, already furnished, at less than half the cost of anything else I'd seen. The post was written by a guy named Caleb. His profile picture showed him with a friendly smile, standing in front of a coffee shop with a few friends. He looked normal, safe even. He told me over messages that he had been living in the apartment for almost a year, but his last roommate had just moved out suddenly, leaving him with an empty room and the full rent to cover. He wanted someone as soon as possible. We met for coffee a couple of days later, and everything seemed fine. Caleb was soft-spoken, maybe a little awkward, but friendly enough. He asked me normal roommate questions. Did I smoke? Was I messy? Did I stay up late blasting music? And when I answered, he nodded politely and said, "That works perfectly for me." He seemed relieved, almost too relieved, like he was afraid I might say no. I moved in that weekend. At first, living with Caleb felt almost too easy. He was gone most of the day, said he worked long shifts at some warehouse on the outskirts of the city. We rarely crossed paths, and when we did, the interactions were brief but polite. He'd smile, ask me how classes were going, then retreat to his room with the door closed. It wasn't until about 2 weeks in that I noticed something strange. One night, I was coming back from the library around 11 p.m. The apartment lights were off, but as I slipped my key into the lock, I heard footsteps moving inside. Slow, deliberate steps pacing back and forth. I froze, debating whether to call out, but before I could decide, the sound stopped. The apartment went dead silent. When I opened the door, the place was empty. Caleb's bedroom door was shut tight. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he'd heard me outside and gone to bed, but it kept happening. At random hours, midnight, 3 in the morning, even during the afternoon, I'd hear the unmistakable sound of someone pacing the length of the hallway. Whenever I looked, no one was there. Caleb would emerge hours later, yawning as though he'd been asleep the whole time. The real unease began one morning when I left for class. I was locking the door behind me when I caught a glimpse of Caleb through the hallway window, standing outside the building, staring up at our apartment. I waved, and he smiled faintly, but didn't wave back. It was odd, but maybe he was just distracted. Except that when I got back that afternoon, Caleb was inside the apartment, sitting on the couch watching TV. He looked surprised to see me. "I thought you had class all day," he said. "I do," I replied slowly. "Didn't I just see you outside this morning?" He blinked. "I've been home all day." That night, I couldn't shake the unease. I replayed the moment over and over. The person I saw outside had been Caleb. Same messy brown hair, same tired eyes, same gray hoodie. But if Caleb had been home the whole time, who the hell was standing on the street staring up at our apartment? Things escalated quickly after that. I started seeing Caleb in places he shouldn't have been. Once I spotted him on the train during my commute, sitting 2 cars ahead of me, staring blankly out the window. But when I got home that evening, he was in the apartment claiming he hadn't left all day. Another time, I saw him crossing the street near campus, only for him to text me 10 minutes later asking if I wanted dinner because he was already cooking. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe the stress of grad school was making me paranoid. But then came the night that removed all doubt. It was around 2 a.m. I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't locked it because I trusted Caleb, but now I cursed myself for that mistake. I lay frozen as a figure stepped into the room. "Caleb," I whispered. The figure moved closer, and in the faint glow from the streetlight outside, I saw his face. It was Caleb, or at least it looked like him. But his eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark, with no reflection of the light. His smile stretched far too much, curling up at the edges like a mask that didn't quite fit. He leaned down close to me, so close I could feel his breath on my cheek, and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Then he turned and slipped out of the room without another sound. I lay awake until morning, too terrified to move. When I finally gathered the courage to leave my room, I found Caleb in the kitchen, pouring himself cereal like nothing had happened. He looked groggy, half asleep. When I told him what I saw, he just laughed nervously and said, "You must have been dreaming." But I know I wasn't dreaming. I can still feel that cold breath on my skin. The final straw came a week later. I returned home late, and as I climbed the stairs to our floor, I saw Caleb standing at the end of the hallway. He was facing away from me, just standing there. I called his name softly, but he didn't respond. When I got closer, he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see that same wrong smile stretching across his face. I bolted inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. A few minutes later, Caleb emerged from his bedroom, rubbing his eyes, asking why I was making so much noise. That was when I realized something horrifying. There were 2 Calebs. One of them was the normal roommate I'd moved in with, and the other was something else entirely. Something that wore his face but wasn't him. I don't live there anymore. I packed my bags and left without even explaining. Told Caleb I had family issues and needed to move. He didn't question it, just nodded slowly, almost like he understood. But sometimes, when I'm out in the city, I still see him. Or at least, I see the other version of him. Standing at a distance, smiling that same impossible smile, watching me. When I was 24, I found myself moving into a small house with a stranger. I didn't have much of a choice at the time. Rent prices had spiked, and the only listing within my budget was this old 2-story place on the outskirts of town. The ad said the owner, a guy named Marcus, was looking for a roommate to help split the cost. The photos were decent. Creaky hardwood floors, old but clean furniture, a yard that hadn't been touched in years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was affordable. Marcus was around 30, tall, with neatly cut dark hair and glasses that made him look more like a grad student than a landlord. He was polite, a little distant, but he gave me a warm enough smile when we met. He explained that the house had been in his family for generations, and he'd inherited it after his parents passed. He seemed almost apologetic about its condition, saying, "It's not perfect, but it has good bones. You'll get used to the creaks." The only rule, he told me as he handed me the keys, was that I wasn't allowed in the basement. He said it casually, almost jokingly, but the look in his eyes made it clear he wasn't kidding. "That part of the house isn't safe," he added. "The floorboards are weak, wiring's bad, and there's mold. Just don't go down there." At first, I didn't think much of it. Lots of old houses have areas that are off limits. I unpacked my bags in the upstairs room, tried to make it my own, and settled into the rhythm of living with Marcus. For the first couple of weeks, things went smoothly. He worked long hours at some insurance firm, so I usually had the house to myself. When he was home, he spent most of his time in his study, quietly reading or working on his laptop. We'd occasionally share a beer in the kitchen, and he seemed like a decent guy. Maybe a little too quiet, but harmless. But the house itself, that was another story. It was never really silent. The walls seemed to breathe, the pipes groaned at odd hours, and sometimes I'd swear I heard footsteps downstairs, even when I knew Marcus wasn't home. One night, while I was finishing up some work at the dining table, I heard something from the basement. It was faint at first, just a low thumping sound like something hitting the wall. I froze, listening closely. After a few seconds, it came again. A steady rhythm. Thud. 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 I tried to tell myself it was the old house settling, or maybe the boiler kicking on, but then I heard something else. A voice. Soft, muffled, coming from below. It was impossible to make out the words, but it sounded like someone was talking, no, whispering from the basement. I remember standing there, staring at the locked door at the end of the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispering stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving only silence behind. When Marcus got home later, I asked him casually if there were animals down there. Rats, maybe. He looked at me for a long moment before shaking his head. "No," he said firmly. "There's nothing down there." Then he changed the subject. But the noises didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. Some nights I'd hear scratching on the underside of the floor, like fingernails dragging across the wood. Other times it sounded like someone was pacing directly beneath me, slow and deliberate. Once I woke up to the sound of crying, a soft, choked sob that seemed to rise up through the vents. I lay there in bed, clutching the blanket, too terrified to move. My curiosity got the better of me. During the day, when Marcus was at work, I tried the basement door. It was locked tight, of course, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was down there. I even considered buying a lock-picking kit, but part of me was too afraid of what I might find. Then, one night, everything changed. It was just after 2 a.m. I was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it again, the whispering. Only this time it was louder, clearer. I could make out words, though they were distorted, as if spoken through water. My name, over and over again, in a hushed, urgent tone. I bolted upright, sweat dripping down my back. The sound was definitely coming from the basement. I crept out of my room, every instinct screaming at me to go back, but I couldn't. I had to know. As I stood at the top of the stairs, staring at the locked door, I realized something was wrong. The whispering wasn't muffled anymore. It was on the other side of the door, as if whoever, or whatever, was down there had come right up to the entrance. Then the handle began to turn. Slowly, silently, the knob twisted back and forth, like someone was trying to open it. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The door rattled once, twice, then stopped. The next morning, Marcus acted like nothing had happened. He brewed coffee, asked how I'd slept, and when I mentioned the noises again, his smile faltered. "You're imagining things," he said. "This house plays tricks on people." But his voice was tight, his hands trembling as he sipped his mug. I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag that afternoon, planning to crash with a friend until I figured out my next move. But when I got back from class, my suitcase was gone. It had been sitting in my room that morning, zipped and ready, but now it wasn't there. Instead, I found it sitting at the bottom of the stairs, in front of the basement door. That night, I locked my bedroom and shoved a chair under the handle. I barely slept, lying awake and listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard the basement door creak open. Not rattle, not whisper, open. I heard slow, heavy footsteps climbing the stairs, one by one, until they stopped just outside my door. Then, silence. I pressed my ear to the wood, trembling. For a moment, I thought I could hear breathing on the other side. Then came a voice, low and hoarse, almost identical to Marcus's. let me in. When I first moved into the old townhouse, I honestly thought I had struck gold. Rent in the city was brutal, but this place was surprisingly affordable. 3 floors, tall ceilings, and a room that actually had space for more than just a bed and desk. The only catch was that I had to share it with another tenant who was already living there. His name was Ryan, a graduate student who kept to himself most of the time. When I met him, he was polite, quiet, maybe a little too intense with the way he stared, but nothing that sent alarm bells ringing. The first couple of weeks were normal enough. We barely saw each other. He usually stayed in his room, buried in papers and textbooks, while I came and went from work. Sometimes late at night I'd hear him pacing in his room or muttering to himself, but I chalked it up to stress. Grad students are notorious for pulling all-nighters, and it wasn't really my business. But then the small things began. Subtle things that I almost missed at first, like how I'd come home to find the living room blinds drawn when I was sure I had left them open, or how my toothbrush would be slightly damp even though I hadn't touched it all day. One evening, I left my wallet on the counter before heading into the shower, and when I came back, it was sitting on the opposite end of the counter, neatly closed, as if someone had picked it up and carefully set it back down. I started to suspect Ryan, but the problem was, I also saw him leave for campus in the mornings and not return until evening. On days when he wasn't home, the strange little shifts in my belongings still happened. It was unnerving, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was scatterbrained. Maybe I was remembering things wrong. Then came the night that shattered that illusion. It was around midnight, and I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were heavy, deliberate, moving past my room toward the kitchen. I thought it was Ryan getting a late-night snack, but curiosity got the better of me, and I cracked my door open. That's when I saw him, or rather I saw someone who looked exactly like him. Same messy hair, same hoodie, same slouched walk. He was standing in the kitchen with his back to me, staring at the fridge without opening it, just staring. I watched for a good 30 seconds, waiting for him to move, but he didn't. It was like he had frozen mid-thought. Finally, I whispered, "Ryan?" The figure turned its head slightly, and I swear to God the face I saw was Ryan's, but stretched somehow. The skin didn't quite sit right on the bones, and the eyes were too wide, too dark, like marbles shoved into sockets. The corners of his mouth pulled up in a smile that looked painted on. I slammed my door shut and locked it. My heart was racing so fast I thought I'd pass out. I stayed awake all night, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every distant groan of the old house. The next morning, Ryan came out of his room looking normal, tired but human. He poured himself coffee and asked if I wanted any, completely oblivious to the fact that I had seen something wearing his face just hours earlier. I convinced myself it was a nightmare brought on by stress. Maybe I had dozed off and dreamed the whole thing. But deep down, I knew better. The encounters didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing him, or it, more frequently. Sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes standing at the end of the hallway, half in shadow, just watching me. Once, I came home early from work and found Ryan sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. The screen was off. He didn't even acknowledge me when I walked past. I locked myself in my room until I heard the front door open an hour later, and Ryan's real voice call out, "Hey, you home?" I started testing him, asking questions only the real Ryan would know about his classes, his research, even his favorite bands. Most of the time his answers were normal, but sometimes he'd hesitate just a second too long. Or he'd repeat my question back to me, like he was buying time. The worst was the night I woke up and saw him standing at the foot of my bed. At first I thought it was Ryan sleepwalking. His figure was outlined in the faint glow of the street lamp outside, standing perfectly still. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something horrifying. He was wearing the exact same clothes I had fallen asleep in, down to the faded shirt and old sweatpants. He was me, or at least he looked like me. I couldn't breathe. My body locked up as I stared at my own face, grinning down at me with wide, lifeless eyes. It leaned closer, its voice a perfect copy of mine, whispering, "You're not supposed to be here." I must have blacked out because the next thing I remember is sunlight streaming through my window. My door was still locked, and when I stumbled into the kitchen, Ryan was there making eggs like nothing had happened. I moved out 2 days later, but even now, months later, I still see him sometimes. On the subway, in the reflection of shop windows, walking a few paces behind me at night. And sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I catch a glimpse in the mirror, not of my own reflection, but of him smiling that awful, stretched smile. I couldn't shake the unease that lingered after my first week with Eric. At first, I brushed it off as my own paranoia, moving into a new apartment, new routines, new faces. But the small details piled up in ways I couldn't ignore. He always seemed to know things I hadn't told him. For example, one evening, I came home late after stopping at a coffee shop. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Yet, when I walked in, Eric glanced at the cup in my hand and casually said, "Caramel macchiato? You always order that when you're stressed." I froze. He was right. But how would he know? I'd never ordered that drink in front of him. When I asked, he just smirked and said, "People are more predictable than they think." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine, like he was studying me, collecting data, cataloging my every move. The apartment itself didn't help. It was an old, creaky building, the kind where the pipes groan like someone whispering through the walls. At night, I would hear faint movements, soft footsteps in the living room, the sound of drawers opening and closing. At first, I thought Eric was just moving around late at night. But when I peeked out of my bedroom once, the apartment was dark and silent. His door was closed, and under the crack I could see the glow of his lamp. He was definitely in his room. So who or what was walking around? The most disturbing incident came about a month in. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I felt the unmistakable sensation of someone standing over me. My body tensed, and my eyes flew open. For just a second, in the dim light filtering through the blinds, I swore I saw Eric standing in my doorway. He didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a shadow framed in the door. I sat up, startled, and snapped, "Eric, what the hell are you doing?" But as I blinked, the doorway was empty. No one was there. My heart hammered as I jumped out of bed, checking the hall. His door was shut. The apartment was silent again. I told myself it was a dream, some kind of sleep paralysis hallucination. But the next morning over breakfast, Eric looked at me with that unnerving half smile and said, "Rough night? You talk in your sleep, you know. Something about not wanting me to watch you." I nearly dropped my spoon. How could he possibly know that unless he had actually been there standing in my doorway? As the weeks dragged on, I began to notice more evidence that Eric had been inside my room while I slept. A drawer slightly open that I never leave open. My journal shifted just enough on my desk that I knew someone had touched it. Once, I found my phone unplugged and face down on the floor, even though I always left it charging on my nightstand. The most disturbing discovery was the small, almost imperceptible camera lens I found hidden in the corner of my bookshelf. It was tucked between old college textbooks I rarely touched. I only found it because the red recording light blinked faintly in the dark. My blood ran cold. When I confronted Eric about it, he didn't deny it. He just stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment before saying softly, "You should be careful accusing people of things. Some secrets are better left alone." His voice wasn't angry. It was calm, almost playful, which somehow made it worse. That night, I locked my door for the first time. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lock wouldn't matter, that Eric would find a way in if he wanted to. And deep down, I knew he already had. The tension between us grew unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights felt loaded with menace. I started staying later at work just to avoid being in the apartment with him. But one night, when I finally got home close to midnight, I found something that made my blood run colder than ever before. On the kitchen table sat my journal, wide open, flipped to the last page I had written on. And in Eric's handwriting, not mine, were the words, "I like watching you sleep." The first few weeks with Marcus were, for the most part, uneventful. We didn't talk much, but I didn't mind. I was buried in coursework and spent most evenings at the library. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed to have an odd schedule. Some nights I'd come home to find him asleep on the couch, the TV flashing static like it had been left on an abandoned channel. Other times he'd be sitting in the dark, staring out the living room window, motionless, as if he was waiting for something or someone to appear outside. When I asked him once what he was looking at, he didn't even turn his head. He just muttered, "You wouldn't see it anyway," and went silent again. That answer sat heavy in my mind, like a question that shouldn't be asked twice. The strangest part, though, was the noises. At first, I chalked it up to the old building, the pipes rattling, the wooden floors settling, the wind slipping through the cracks of century-old windows. But soon I started hearing things I couldn't explain. It always happened around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. A soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood, echoed from Marcus's room. Sometimes it was followed by muffled whispers. At first I thought he was on the phone late at night, but when I listened closer, the voices were wrong. They overlapped, layers of different pitches, tones, and languages, all whispering at once. I would press my ear against the wall, straining to catch a single word, but the moment I focused, the whispers would stop. Then, without fail, I'd hear Marcus laugh. Not a chuckle, not a snort, but a slow, deliberate laugh that sounded like it wasn't meant to be heard by another human being. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, my hands trembling, and knocked on his door. "Marcus, everything okay in there?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Silence. Then, slowly, I heard his footsteps approach. The door creaked open just enough for me to see his face, lit only by the faint glow of a candle behind him. His eyes were wide and unblinking, pupils almost swallowing the color. His skin looked pale, almost gray under the dim light. He smiled, not the kind of smile a friend gives, but the kind that feels like a warning. "Could you keep it down?" he whispered, though I hadn't been making any noise at all. He shut the door before I could answer. After that, I avoided him. We crossed paths in the kitchen occasionally, and every time I noticed he never touched the fridge. I never saw him eat. His plate in the sink always looked spotless, as though it hadn't been used. The only thing I ever saw him drink was water, and even that was rare. Yet he never looked tired, never looked hungry. Just hollow. Things escalated one Thursday night when I came home late from the library. The apartment was completely dark, except for a faint glow coming from Marcus's room. His door was cracked open an inch, and the glow pulsed, like light bending underwater. I don't know why, but I crept closer. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe stupidity, but something in me had to know what was going on. As I leaned toward the crack, I heard the whispers again, low, layered, incomprehensible. The pulsing light spilled onto the hallway floor, shifting from red to blue to a sickly green. And then I saw it. A shadow moved across the light inside his room, but it wasn't Marcus. It was taller, bulkier, with elongated arms that reached almost to the floor. It brushed against the wall, and the wallpaper bubbled where it touched, like the surface of skin blistering. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs, and my heel hit a loose floorboard. The creak echoed like a gunshot. The whispers stopped instantly. Silence. Then Marcus's voice floated out of the room, soft but sharp, like a blade pressed against my ear. "You shouldn't be watching." I bolted to my room and locked the door, pressing my back against it like a child terrified of monsters under the bed. For hours I sat there in the dark, listening to his footsteps move slowly down the hall. He stopped outside my door, and I swear I heard him breathing, low, deliberate, inhumanly steady. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Marcus acted like nothing happened. He greeted me with a casual "morning," his voice cheery, almost mocking as he poured himself a glass of water. But his eyes lingered on me too long, as though he knew I'd seen something I shouldn't have. And that's when I realized I wasn't safe in my own apartment anymore. But leaving wasn't that simple. My name was on the lease, and I couldn't afford another place. I told myself maybe I'd just imagined it. Maybe stress and sleep deprivation were making me paranoid. But deep down, I knew the truth. Marcus wasn't normal, and whatever he was doing in that room, it was only getting stronger. I never thought moving into a new apartment would turn into the darkest chapter of my life. Back then, I was just a broke college student looking for a place I could afford, and when I stumbled across the listing online, it seemed like a miracle. The apartment was small, but the price was ridiculously low for the area. The only catch was that I'd have to share it with someone, my new roommate. His name was Daniel. The first time I met him, I immediately noticed something was off. He was tall, pale, with sunken eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in weeks. His handshake was cold, almost lifeless, and his smile felt forced, as if he had practiced it in a mirror. I told myself I was just overthinking. It was probably stress from finals, and I didn't want to lose the place over a gut feeling, so I signed the lease. At first, everything seemed fine. Daniel kept to himself most of the time, always locked in his room. The only sounds I heard were the soft shuffle of his footsteps in the hallway late at night, sometimes past 2 or 3 a.m. I'd catch glimpses of him in the kitchen at odd hours, standing there with the fridge door wide open, staring blankly at the light like he wasn't even looking for food. He never really ate in front of me. About 2 weeks in, little things started happening that I couldn't explain. I'd wake up to find the furniture in the living room slightly moved, like someone had been dragging the chairs around. My textbooks would be shifted on my desk, even though I hadn't touched them. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought Daniel had someone over, but when I listened closely, the whispers seemed to be coming from right outside my door. I held my breath, heart pounding, until the whispering stopped. The next morning, Daniel acted completely normal, as though nothing had happened. I tried brushing it off, convincing myself it was just stress or maybe even sleep paralysis. But then I started noticing the scratches. On the walls of the hallway, faint at first, almost like claw marks. Every morning more would appear. I confronted Daniel about it one morning, but he just smiled and said, "The walls have a way of remembering things." His answer made no sense, and the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Things escalated fast after that. One night I woke up freezing cold. My window was shut tight, but I could see my breath in the air. I heard the creak of my bedroom door slowly opening, and I froze under the blanket. When I peeked, I saw Daniel standing there in the dark. He didn't say anything. He just stood in the doorway watching me, his silhouette motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. After what felt like forever, he closed the door without a word. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, when I asked him what the hell he was doing, he just laughed softly and said, "Sometimes I forget which room is mine." I didn't buy that for a second, but I didn't push further. Something about him scared me in a way I couldn't explain. The worst night came about a month after I moved in. I woke up again to that same whispering sound. Only this time, it wasn't outside my door. It was inside my room. My entire body went numb. I sat up slowly, trying to locate the source, and that's when I saw him. Daniel was crouched in the corner of my room, his face buried in his hands, whispering rapidly to himself. The only words I could make out were, "He knows now. He knows." My heart was hammering so hard I thought I would pass out. I shouted his name, demanding he leave my room, but when he lifted his head, his eyes were wide and bloodshot, and his grin stretched unnaturally wide. He crawled across the floor toward me, not walked, but crawled, his fingers scraping against the wooden boards. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and locked myself in the bathroom, dialing 911 with trembling hands. By the time the police arrived, Daniel was gone. His room was empty, not just of him, but of everything. No clothes, no furniture, nothing. It looked like nobody had ever lived there at all. The landlord swore I had signed the lease alone, and when I checked the paperwork, there was no mention of Daniel's name. No trace of him existed, not online, not on the lease, not even in the building records. But here's the part that still keeps me awake at night. After I moved out, I checked the photos from the apartment listing again. In one of the photos, the one of the bedroom, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A tall, pale figure standing in the corner of the room, staring directly at the camera. And it wasn't just the room I stayed in. It was the exact corner where I first saw Daniel crouching, whispering in the dark.